Samantha's hands gripped the metal tray so tightly her knuckles turned white. She moved through the military base's mess hall like a ghost, past groups of soldiers, past officers, past recruits loudly discussing yesterday's exercises. No one turned their heads. No one made eye contact with her. She was part of the background, just another camouflaged figure among hundreds like her. Before we continue, please let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your opinion inspires us to do better. Samantha stopped at the counter, picked up a plate of mashed potatoes and chicken, and nodded at the cook, who stared right through her as if she were made of air. She was used to this. In fact, she'd perfected it. Invisibility was her profession, her protection, her way of surviving in a world where attention could cost lives. She found a seat by the window, away from the main tables, and sat with her back to the wall, an old habit impossible to break. Her eyes scanned the room automatically. 2 exits, 1 emergency exit, a group of officers to the left, recruits to the right. No threats. Her brain worked on autopilot, analyzing, evaluating, calculating. Samantha picked up her fork but didn't have time to bring it to her mouth. A sharp nudge on her shoulder caused the tray to tip over. Mashed potatoes slid to the edge of the plate. Gravy splattered across the table. Samantha froze, her fork frozen mid-stroke. She slowly looked up. A burly man of about 30 stood before her, his face etched with displeasure. His insignia indicated his rank as a corporal, and the name on his chest read, Derek Morris. He held his tray in one hand and looked down at her with ill-concealed irritation. "Make room," he said, not even trying to soften his tone. "These are people with real experience, not extras like you." The dining room didn't fall silent. Conversations continued, laughter boomed from distant tables, and the clanking of cutlery created the familiar background. But a few people nearby quieted down, turning their heads. Conflict always attracts attention, even if it seems insignificant. Samantha looked at Derek for another second, then looked back down at her plate. Her face betrayed nothing. No offense, no anger, no fear. Only absolute calm, which could have seemed indifference. She put down her fork, picked up her tray, and stood without saying a word. Derek snorted, clearly pleased with how easily she'd given in. He plopped down in her seat, sprawled out on the chair, and began eating without even glancing in her direction. For him, the episode was over. Another minor victory on a day when nothing had gone his way. Samantha moved toward the exit. Her steps were quiet, measured. No one looked after her. She was invisible again, and that was exactly what she wanted. But something changed in her body. Her shoulder muscles tensed for a split second, an ancient reflex ingrained by years of training. Her body wanted to respond, wanted to turn around, wanted to show this arrogant idiot that he'd just made a huge mistake. But her mind stopped it. Not here. Not now. Not because of this. She passed a group of new recruits, one of whom accidentally brushed her elbow and muttered an apology without even glancing at her. Samantha walked out of the cafeteria into the empty hallway, stopped, leaned her back against the cold concrete wall, and allowed herself to close her eyes for 3 seconds. Breathe. Just breathe. 3 years ago, she would have been lying on the floor, disarmed and immobilized, before she even knew what had happened. 3 years ago, Samantha Green wasn't a corporal hiding behind anonymity. She was a sharp blade in the hands of the government, an operative on a special task force whose name was never spoken aloud, even in secure rooms. But that was 3 years ago. Now she was just another soldier on a base where everyone knew each other, but no one knew her. Samantha opened her eyes, straightened, and walked down the hallway. Her shift started in 20 minutes. The storage areas didn't do their own checks. She turned the corner and nearly collided with a group of officers walking toward her. At the head of the group was a man who made Samantha feel her heart skip a beat. Major Jacob Rockwell, tall, with a short graying haircut and a face that could have belonged to a school teacher, if not for the scars and cold, assessing gaze. He stopped right in front of her, and his eyes, dark, intent, met hers. He recognized her instantly. Of course he did. He was the one who recruited her, the one who trained her, the one who pulled her out of that damn desert when everything went to hell. "Corporal Green," he said in a level voice that held neither surprise nor joy. It was simply a statement of fact. Samantha froze. The 4 officers around her also stopped, their gazes shifting to her with mild curiosity. She wanted to say something, wanted to signal that they shouldn't talk about this here, shouldn't attract attention. But it was too late. "Come with me," Jacob said, and turned around without waiting for an answer. Samantha had no choice. She followed him, feeling a chill run down her spine. The officers followed, their footsteps echoing loudly in the narrow hallway. They passed several doors, turned into a side wing, and stopped at the entrance to the cafeteria. Jacob pushed the door open and stepped inside. Conversations didn't immediately die down. People continued eating, laughing, and discussing their evening plans. But after a few seconds, someone noticed the patches on Jacob's uniform, and a wave of silence began to spread through the room like ripples in water. The major stopped in the middle of the dining room. His gaze slid over the faces, landing on the table by the window where Derek Morris was finishing his lunch, unaware of what was about to happen. "Corporal Morris." Jacob's voice was quiet, but in the absolute silence it sounded like a gunshot. Derek winced and looked up. His face paled when he saw the rank on Jacob's uniform. He stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over his chair, and stood at attention. "Sir!" Jacob took a step forward, his face impassive, but his eyes were steely. "You encountered Corporal Green a few minutes ago. You told her to clear her seat because, you said, there were people with real experience here. Is that correct?" Derek opened his mouth, then closed it. He glanced quickly at Samantha, who stood behind Jacob, her face neutral as a mask. Derek clearly didn't understand where this was all leading, but his instinct for self-preservation told him he was in deep trouble. "Sir, I didn't know." "Didn't know what?" Jacob kept his voice low, but every word hit like a hammer. "Didn't know that the person you just humiliated spent 3 years on operations you have no right to know about? Didn't know she saved the lives of 47 people during that time? Didn't know she received 2 awards that will forever remain classified?" The silence became absolute. Someone dropped a fork, the sound of metal hitting ceramic deafening. Jacob turned to the assembled group. "Corporal Samantha Green isn't a corporal. She's a special forces operative who works in areas where your presence would mean instant death. She carries out missions that don't appear in official records. And she does it all while remaining invisible, because that's her job." He looked at Derek again. "You just pushed a woman who could have knocked you out in 30 seconds without leaving a mark. And she didn't. Do you know why? Because she has the discipline you lack. Because she understands that true power lies in control, not aggression." Derek stood motionless, his face flushed with shame, his hands shaking at his sides. "You're free to go, Corporal Morris," Jacob said coldly. "But if I hear you disrespect anyone on this base again, you'll spend the next year in a place where the word comfort will seem like a distant dream. Understood?" "Yes, sir!" Jacob nodded and turned to leave. He walked past Samantha, stopped, and said quietly, "Let's go. We need to talk." Samantha followed him. As the cafeteria door closed behind them, she heard a flurry of voices erupt inside, everyone talking at once, discussing what had just happened. Rumors would start spreading in a minute. In an hour, the entire base would know her name. Her carefully constructed invisibility had just shattered into pieces. Jacob led her through the base to the small administrative building, went up to the 2nd floor, and opened the door to his office. Inside, it was Spartanly simple. A desk, 2 chairs, a world map on the wall littered with red pins. He gestured for her to sit and settled himself opposite. For a few seconds, they just looked at each other. "Why did you do this?" Samantha finally asked. Her voice was quiet, but there was a barely concealed pain in it. "I spent 3 years building this life. 3 years trying to become nothing. And you destroyed it in 2 minutes. Jacob sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Because you're hiding, Sam. And I understand why. After Kandahar, after what happened to your team, I understand why you'd want to disappear. But you can't hide forever. I'm not hiding. I'm alive. This isn't life. It's existence." He leaned forward, his eyes staring into her soul. "You're one of the best I've ever trained. You have skills that can save lives, and you waste them checking storage rooms?" Samantha clenched her jaw. "I'm done with the field work. I know. And I'm not asking you to go back into the field. Jacob pulled a folder from his desk drawer and placed it on the table between them. I'm offering you something else. We need a trainer for a new group of operatives. Young, talented, but raw. They need someone who can teach them how to survive. Someone who understands what real work is. Samantha looked at the folder, but did not touch it. I'm not a teacher. You were there. You trained your team. You trained the newcomers in the group. And they all survived, thanks to you. Not all, Samantha said quietly. Jacob fell silent. He knew who she was talking about. Lieutenant Carson, 23 years old, killed during the evacuation, covering the team's retreat. Samantha had been blaming herself for it for 3 years, even though all the reports showed she had done everything possible. Carson made his choice, Jacob said softly. You can't be responsible for other people's choices. I can, if I am their commander. You're no longer a commander, but you can be a mentor. He pulled the folder closer. Think about it. At least open the folder. Look at them. Samantha hesitated, her hand resting in her lap, her fingers clenched into a fist. Then, slowly, she reached out and opened the folder. Inside were photographs. 8 faces, young and determined, men and women, between 20 and 30 years old. Beneath each photo was a brief biography. Place of birth, education, specialization, reason for joining the program. Samantha stopped at one photo. A girl of about 25, with short dark hair, sharp cheekbones, and a look that mingled fear and challenge. Name, Carla Jackson. Specialization, tactical intelligence. Reason for joining, to prove that women can perform any task equally well as men. She reminds me of you, Jacob said quietly. 5 years ago, when you first joined the program. The same fire in your eyes. The same desperate desire to prove your worth. Samantha looked at Jacob. And what will happen to her if I refuse? She'll be trained by someone else. Someone who might not understand what it means to be a woman in this profession. Someone who might break her instead of strengthening her. He stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the training ground below. I can't force you, Sam. It's your choice. But before you refuse, consider this. You spent 3 years hiding from your past. Maybe it's time to use that past to change someone else's future. Samantha looked at the photo of Carla Jackson again. She was looking straight into the camera, her gaze full of challenge, as if she were saying, try to break me, and we'll see who wins. Samantha knew that look. She'd seen it in the mirror 1,000 times. She closed the folder and stood up. When do we start? Jacob smiled, the first real smile he had seen since they met. Tomorrow, 6 in the morning, gym number 3. Samantha nodded and headed for the door. She had already put her hand on the handle when Jacob called out to her. Sam? She turned around. Thank you, he said simply. Samantha didn't answer. She walked out of the office and closed the door behind her. As she walked back through the base, the soldiers looked at her differently. Some nodded respectfully. Some looked away. Some stared openly, as if trying to find something special about her, something that would set her apart from the others. Samantha was no longer invisible, and that was scary. But somewhere deep inside, in a place she'd long considered dead, something stirred. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was something else. She didn't know, but she was going to find out. Samantha hadn't slept much all night. She lay in her narrow barracks bunk, staring at the ceiling, thinking about tomorrow. Or rather, about today. The clock on the wall showed 4 in the morning. Around her, 7 other women, her barracks neighbors, were breathing in their sleep, most of whom hadn't even known her name until yesterday. Now everyone knew. She woke up at 5:30, put on her training clothes, walked out to the empty base, and started running. Her feet pounded the asphalt, her lungs greedily gulping in the cold morning air. She ran fast, almost furiously, as if trying to escape her thoughts. But her thoughts ran right along with her. What if she can't handle it? What if she can't teach them? What if one of them dies, and it's her fault again? She reached the training complex at exactly 6 in the morning. Building number 3 was one of the older structures on the base. Brick walls, tall windows, and a spacious hall with mats on the floor and racks of training weapons lining the walls. The smell of sweat and rubber hung in the air, ingrained by decades of use. When she entered, 8 people were already waiting inside. They stood in a ragged formation in the middle of the gym, all in identical workout gear, all with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright skepticism. Samantha recognized Carla Jackson immediately. She stood at the edge, her hands behind her back, her chin raised, her gaze direct and appraising. Samantha stopped in front of them. For a few seconds, no one said a word. "My name is Samantha Green," she began, her voice even, emotionless. "For the next 6 months, I'll be your instructor. Not your friend, not your mother, not your psychologist, your coach. My job is to teach you how to survive in situations where all the rules stop applying." One of the men in the line, a tall guy with a square jaw and a confident grin, stepped forward. "With respect, ma'am, but most of us have already completed basic training. We know how to survive." Samantha looked at him. His patch read, "Thomas Riley." "Thomas Riley," she said. 28 years old, infantry, 3 years of service, participated in 2 operations in Afghanistan. Good marksmanship, in excellent physical condition. Tommy smiled wider, clearly pleased that she knew his file. "Also," Samantha continued without changing her tone, "you've been disciplined twice for disobeying orders, and once you nearly sabotaged an operation because you decided your plan was better than the commander's. And you still think you're right." Tommy's smile faded. "Real work," Samantha said, looking around the group, "isn't about being able to shoot. It's not about being able to run fast. It's not about being physically strong. Real work is being able to sit in a room where everyone thinks you're nothing and not show that you can knock them all out in 30 seconds. She paused. "It's the ability to look weak when you're strong. To look stupid when you're smart. To look scared when you're ready to kill. Because in the job you're training for, your life doesn't depend on how dangerous you are. It depends on how well you can pretend to be safe." Carla raised her hand. Samantha nodded at her. "What if pretending doesn't work?" Carla asked. Her voice was calm, but genuine interest was evident in it. "Then you should already be ready for the next step," Samantha replied. "But if you act too soon, you expose yourself. And then it's not just you who dies. Everyone who depends on your cover dies." She turned to Tommy. "Show me how you would disarm an opponent with a knife." Tommy straightened up, clearly pleased at the opportunity to demonstrate his skills. Samantha grabbed a training knife from the rack, a rubber blade, safe yet realistic enough. She assumed an attack stance, holding the knife in front of her. "Ready?" she asked. Tommy nodded. Samantha lunged forward, the knife aimed at his stomach. Tommy reacted instantly. He stepped to the side, grabbed her wrist, twisted her arm, and attempted to knock the knife away with a painful hold. He was fast. He was technical. He was confident. And he was on the floor exactly 2 seconds later. Samantha didn't use force. She used his own momentum against him. When he grabbed her wrist, she let her hand fall, simultaneously stepping inside his defenses. Her free hand gently touched his neck, where the carotid artery runs. Her foot clipped his ankle. Tommy fell to the mats with a thud, and the training knife remained in Samantha's hand. She stood over him, not even out of breath. "You reacted to the attack," she said. "You used a standard disarming technique. You did everything correctly, and you lost." Tommy looked up at her, his face a mixture of shock and respect. "Why?" he asked. "Because you reacted, and I acted." Samantha extended her hand to him, helping him to his feet. "In a real situation, you won't have time to react. The enemy won't move slowly. They won't wait for you to make a decision. By the time your brain processes the information and sends a command to your body, you'll already be dead." She turned to face the entire group. "We'll spend the next 6 months learning to close that gap. We'll train your body to react faster than you can think. We'll train your mind to see threats before they manifest. And we'll break all your instincts, because the instincts that work in everyday life will kill you in the field." Silence. Then Carla raised her hand again. "Yes?" Samantha nodded at her. "You said we'd learn to be invisible, but you just showed us how to attack. Isn't that a contradiction?" Samantha almost smiled. almost. No, because invisibility isn't just about hiding. It's about controlling attention. When you attack, you control where your opponent is looking. Tommy was looking at the knife. He didn't see my free hand. He didn't see my leg. I controlled his attention, and that's why I won. She put the knife back on the shelf. Today we'll start with the basics. Tomorrow will be worse. The day after tomorrow, even worse. And so on, until even the worst day here seems like a walk in the park compared to what awaits you in reality. She looked at the clock on the wall. You have 5 minutes to warm up. Then we'll begin. The group dispersed, began stretching, loosening their muscles. Samantha walked to the window and looked out at the training ground outside. Her hands were shaking slightly. Adrenaline was still coursing through her veins after the brief fight with Tommy. She clenched her fists, forcing the shaking to stop. She can handle it. She has to. Because these 8 people now depended on her. The next 2 weeks passed in a regimen that most of the group would call hell. Samantha didn't yell, didn't humiliate, didn't employ classic military drill techniques. She simply demanded perfection, and when they didn't achieve it, and they never did, she made them repeat it again and again until their muscles burned and their minds shut down from exhaustion. But gradually, something began to change. Tommy stopped preemptively acting and began listening. Carla learned to control her anger. The fire in her eyes didn't go out, but now it burned with a focused flame, not a chaotic conflagration. The others caught up, each at their own pace. One evening, after a particularly grueling workout, Carla lingered in the gym. Samantha was gathering up her training weapons and putting everything back in its place when she heard a voice behind her. "Can I ask a question?" Samantha turned around. Carla was standing by the door, still in her sweat-soaked uniform, her hair stuck to her forehead. "Certainly." Carla came closer, hesitated for a second, then asked, "Why did you agree to train us?" Samantha placed the last practice pistol on the shelf. Major Rockwell asked. "That's not an answer," Carla said softly. "You could have refused. You could have stayed where you were. But you came. Why?" Samantha looked at her for a long moment. There was more than just curiosity in Carla's eyes. There was something deeper. A need to understand. A need to find meaning in what she went through every day. "Because 5 years ago, I was in your shoes," Samantha finally said. "And the man who trained me taught me more than just how to survive. He taught me why I survive." "And why?" Samantha sat down on a bench by the wall and tiredly ran her hand over her face. "I thought I knew the answer. I thought it was about defending the country, about doing one's duty, about all those fine words they say at awards ceremonies." She looked up at Carla. "Then I lost a man from my team, Lieutenant Carson. He was 23. He died covering our evacuation." Carla sat down next to her without saying a word. "After that, for a long time, I couldn't understand why I kept going," Samantha continued. "If people are still dying, if you can't save everyone, what's the point of trying?" She paused for a second. "And then I understood. The point isn't to save everyone. The point is to give a chance to those you can save." Carla nodded slowly. "And you think you can give us this chance?" "I know I can. If you listen, if you trust, and if you're willing to accept that sometimes survival means not fighting, but retreating." Carla chuckled. "You don't look like a person who retreats." "Because I've learned to choose my battles." Samantha stood up, offered Carla her hand, and helped her up. "You're strong, Carla. Stronger than you think. But strength without control is simply violence, and violence will eventually destroy you." Carla shook her hand firmly. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For being here. For not giving in to us." Samantha didn't answer. She simply nodded, and together they walked out of the hall into the warm evening air. A few more weeks passed. The group grew stronger, faster, smarter. Samantha saw them changing, not just physically, but mentally as well. They began to think like operatives, not soldiers. They began to see what others overlooked. They began to understand the play of shadows and light in which she had lived for so many years. And Samantha began to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. Not for herself. For them. But everything changed one warm day at the end of the second month of training. Samantha was leading a group exercise at the range when a young sergeant from headquarters ran up to her. "Corporal Green!" He was out of breath, clearly having run across the entire base. "Major Rockwell requests that you report to the command center immediately. Urgent." Samantha felt something tighten inside her. The word urgent in their world meant only one thing: trouble. She turned to the group. "Carla, you're in charge. Keep practicing. I'll be back as soon as I can." She ran after the sergeant across the base, her heart pounding in time with her steps. The command center was located in a secure bunker beneath the main administrative building. It was only called in for high-priority operations. When she came downstairs, Jacob was already waiting for her in the briefing room. A map of a mountainous area somewhere in the Middle East glowed on the screen behind him. Red markers marked several points. "What happened?" Samantha asked, not even sitting down. Jacob turned to face her, his face tense. 48 hours ago, a group of 5 of our operatives was captured in northern Syria. They were working undercover, gathering intelligence on a terrorist cell. Something went wrong. They were exposed. Samantha felt a chill in her stomach. "Who?" Jacob pressed a button on the remote. 5 photographs appeared on the screen. Samantha recognized them all. They were people from her former program, people she'd worked with before Kandahar. "We have information that they are being held in a small village in the mountains," Jacob continued. "Local militants plan to smuggle them across the border the day after tomorrow. If that happens, we won't see them again." "You're sending a rescue team," Samantha said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, and I want you to be a part of it." Samantha froze. I'm not an operative anymore, sir. I'm an instructor." "You're the best operative I know." Jacob stepped closer. "Sam, I know it's a lot to ask. I know you left this life behind. But these people are your people. They're counting on us to get them out, and I need someone who knows how to operate in this region. Someone I can trust." Samantha looked at the photographs on the screen. 5 faces, 5 lives. "How much time do I have to prepare?" 6 o'clock. Flight departs at midnight." Samantha nodded. "I'm taking Carla with me." Jacob frowned. "She hasn't finished her studies yet." "I know. But she's ready, and she needs to see what real work is." Samantha looked him in the eye. "You said you wanted me to teach them." "I do. But at some point, learning has to become practice." Jacob was silent for a long time, then nodded slowly. "Okay, but she's your responsibility." "I understand." Samantha turned and left the room. When she returned to the training grounds, the group was still training under Carla's direction. Samantha beckoned to Carla. Carla ran up, wiping sweat from her forehead. "What's happened?" "We're leaving for surgery in 6 hours, Samantha said quietly, so the others wouldn't hear. "A rescue mission. High risk. I want you on the team." Carla's eyes widened. "Me? But You're ready." "I wouldn't have taken you if I wasn't sure." Samantha placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's your choice, Carla. You can refuse. No one will blame you. But if you go all the way. Understand?" Carla straightened up, the same fire Samantha had seen on the first day blazing in her eyes. "I'm coming." "Then you have 4 hours to get ready and rest. We'll meet at hangar number 7 at 2300. Carla nodded and ran back to the group. Samantha watched her go, thinking about what she'd just done. She'd taken an untrained girl on a deadly mission. If something went wrong, if Carla died. No, she couldn't think like that. Carla was ready. She had to be ready. Because Samantha needed someone to trust. And for some reason, she trusted this stubborn girl with fire in her eyes. At 10:23 a.m., Samantha stood outside Hangar 7, checking her gear one last time. Body armor, radio, knife, Glock 19 pistol, M4 assault rifle, 4 spare magazines, first aid kit, flashlight, compass, GPS. Everything was in place. Everything was familiar. Like old clothes she hadn't worn in 3 years but still fit perfectly. Carla appeared a minute later, fully equipped, her face serious but her hands shaking slightly as she checked the fastenings on her vest. Samantha noticed but said nothing. A little fear is good. Fear keeps you alive. It's not the shaking in your hands that's dangerous, but the lack of it. Jacob emerged from the hangar with the rest of the team. 4 operatives Samantha knew by reputation, but had never worked with directly. Captain Marcus Stone, 42, a Special Forces veteran with a face scarred and battered by time. Lieutenant David Chen, 35, an explosive specialist. A quiet Asian man with cold eyes. Sergeant Elijah Brown, 29, a medic and sniper. A black man with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes. And Corporal Eva Novak, 31, a communications specialist and hacker. A woman with short hair and a tattoo on her neck. Team, Jacob said, and everyone turned to him. The mission is simple on paper, complex in practice. 5 of our men are being held in the village of Al-Karim, in the mountains 40 kilometers from the Turkish border. The guards are about 15 fighters, moderately armed, but they know the area. We have satellite images showing where the hostages are being held. The basement of an old building in the center of the village. He unfolded the tablet and showed them the enlarged image. There are 2 entrances, the main one and the secondary one. Both are guarded. The plan is as follows. Stone leads the team through the main entrance. Green takes Jackson and goes through the secondary one. Chen plants diversionary charges on the east side of the village. Brown takes a sniper position on the hill. Novak stays on the line and coordinates. Entry, hostage evacuation, exit. 20 minutes tops. Questions? Samantha raised her hand. What about the civilians? There are about 50 people in the village, mostly women and children. The militants use them as shields. We don't use force if there's a risk of harming civilians. Jacob looked at each of them. This is an extraction, not a cleanup. We pick up our own and leave, clean and quiet. Stone chuckled. Quiet is good in theory. That's why we have a plan B, Jacob replied. If anything goes wrong, Chen detonates the charges, creates panic, and we use the chaos for cover. But this is a last resort, understood? Everyone nodded. Okay, you'll be leaving in 10 minutes. Good luck. Jacob lingered next to Samantha as the others began to board the Black Hawk helicopter that was waiting on the runway. Are you sure about Jackson? He asked quietly. Samantha looked at Carla, who was checking her rifle one last time, her face focused. Yes, she replied. She can handle it. And you? Samantha turned to face him. I'm not breaking down, Jacob. I'm just putting off repairs until later. He almost smiled. See you in 12 hours. Samantha nodded and walked toward the helicopter. Carla was already seated inside, strapped in, her helmet on, her eyes staring straight ahead. Samantha sat down next to her, buckled herself in and put on the headphones and microphone. The engines roared. The blades began to spin, creating a powerful airflow. The helicopter lifted off smoothly, almost tenderly, then quickly gained altitude and turned east. For the next 4 hours, they flew in silence. The lights of cities floated below, then the darkness of the ocean, then lights again, the Turkish coastline. The helicopter flew at low altitude, skirting radars, using the terrain as cover. Samantha closed her eyes and allowed herself to sink into a state she hadn't experienced in 3 years. Total concentration, completely emotionless. Her mind became cold and sharp, like a knife blade. Her body relaxed, yet remained ready for instant action. It was like coming home to a house you hate, but which is still the only place where you feel like yourself. Green, Stone's voice came through the headphones. Checking the connection. I hear you clearly, Samantha replied. Jackson? On the line. Carla's voice was even, but Samantha could hear the tension behind it. Chen? Ready. Brown? On site. Novak? All channels are clear. The satellite is in position. Okay, 2 minutes until landing. Samantha opened her eyes and looked out the window. The mountains were already visible below, dark silhouettes against the slightly lighter sky. Somewhere out there, in one of those valleys, lay the village of Al-Karim, and 5 people awaiting rescue. The helicopter began its descent. They landed on a rocky plateau 3 kilometers from the village, far enough that the sound of the engines wouldn't attract attention, but close enough to walk there in 20 minutes. The crew disembarked quickly and silently. The pilot gave the signal to wait at this location. The engines shut down, and the plane was ready for immediate takeoff. Stone raised his hand, pointing in the direction. They moved in single file, keeping a distance of 5 meters between people. Samantha was third, Carla behind her. The girl moved well, silently, confidently, her rifle in the correct position. Samantha felt proud. 2 weeks ago, Carla would have been noisy like a bull in a china shop. Now she was almost inaudible. They walked for 23 minutes. The village appeared before them unexpectedly, a scattering of low clay and stone houses, narrow streets, a few dim lanterns. Most of the windows were dark. It was 3 in the morning. Everyone was asleep. The team stopped at the edge of the village and took cover behind the rubble of an old wall. "Brown, position," Stone ordered in a whisper. "I'm coming." Elijah separated from the group and ran up the hillside, disappearing into the darkness. "Chen, plant the charges." "Understood." David disappeared in the opposite direction, moving along the eastern edge of the village. Stone turned to Samantha. "We're entering in 3 minutes. Sync it up." Samantha nodded, checking her watch. 3 minutes. 180 seconds until everything either went according to plan or descended into chaos. She looked at Carla. "You stay behind me. No matter what happens, you don't fall behind and you don't overtake. If I stop, you stop. If I tell you to run, you run. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am. And one more thing." Samantha placed a hand on her shoulder. "If you see me wounded or killed, you don't stop. You're on a mission. The hostages are the priority, not me. Understand?" Carla swallowed. "Clear." "Good girl." Brown's voice came through the headphones. "The sniper position is occupied. I see 2 patrols, 3 at the main entrance, 2 at the secondary one. The rest are inside the buildings." "Novak, thermal scan," Stone said. A second's pause, then Eva's voice. "Confirmed. 15 heat sources in the village. 5 in the basement of the target building, probably hostages and guards. The rest are scattered." "Chen, what's the status?" "The charges are set, awaiting orders." "Excellent. We'll start in..." Stone looked at his watch. 30 seconds. Samantha checked her rifle one last time. There was a round in the chamber. The safety was off. The sights were adjusted. Everything was ready. She glanced at Carla. The girl was breathing slowly and deeply, controlling her adrenaline. A good sign. 10 seconds. Samantha felt time slow down. It always happened before surgery. The seconds stretched. Sounds became clearer. Vision sharpened. The world became a collection of threats and possibilities. Everything unnecessary was cut off. 5. She stood up, bending over. 3. Carla stood next to him. Forward. They moved into the darkness of the village. Samantha and Carla skirted the village's western edge, following the wall of an old house. The narrow streets were empty, only the wind whipping sand and paper trash. A dog barked in the distance, then fell silent. The secondary entrance was at the rear of the target building, an old warehouse or a mosque, Samantha wasn't sure. The door was wooden, cracked, with rusty hinges. 2 guards stood nearby, both with Kalashnikov assault rifles, both smoking and speaking Arabic. Samantha stopped around the corner 20 meters away, raising her hand to stop Carla. She listened to the conversation. One was complaining about the heat, another about not being paid enough. The usual chatter. No alarm. "Brown," Samantha whispered into the microphone. 2 at the back entrance, can you?" "I see," Elijah replied. Awaiting command. Samantha checked her watch. In 30 seconds, Stone would begin moving from the main entrance. She needed to act simultaneously. 20 seconds. She looked at Carla and gestured. "When they fall, we move. Quickly and quietly." 10 seconds. Samantha tensed, ready to lunge. 5. Stone's voice in the headphones. "Forward." 2 muffled bangs, almost inaudible from a distance. Both guards jerked and collapsed to the ground. The silenced sniper rifle worked flawlessly. Samantha ran. Her feet barely touched the ground, her body moving on autopilot. Carla was 2 meters behind. They reached the door in 4 seconds. Samantha pushed the door open. It was unlocked. Inside it was dark and musty. She entered, rifle pressed to her shoulder, finger on the trigger. Carla followed her and closed the door. A long corridor, stone walls, a dim light bulb at the end. To the right, a staircase going down. "The basement," Samantha whispered. "Let's go." They began to descend. The steps creaked underfoot, despite their best efforts to move silently. Samantha slowed, listening intently. Voices below. Two men, speaking Arabic, one laughing. Samantha reached the last step and peered around the corner. A small room, about 4 by 5 meters. Two guards were sitting at a table playing cards. Behind them was a heavy metal door with a bolt. Hostages behind that door. Samantha assessed the situation. The guards were relaxed. Their weapons were parked against the wall 3 meters away. Poor discipline. Good for her. She gestured to Carla. "I'll take the left one. You take the right one. At the same time. On 3. Carla nodded. Her hands no longer shook. Her face was focused, cold. Samantha began counting with her fingers. 1, 2, 3. They came out from around the corner at the same time, rifles raised. "Hands up!" Samantha shouted in Arabic. The guards flinched and reached for their weapons. Stupid. Very stupid. 2 short bursts of fire, 3 shots each. Both guards fell from their chairs, blood splattering the walls. Silence. Then a scream came from behind the metal door. A woman's voice, frightened. Samantha rushed to the door, pulled back the bolt, and yanked it open. Inside was a dark room, 5 figures sitting on the floor, their hands bound behind their backs, their mouths gagged. "We're our own," Samantha said quickly. "The American Army. We're evacuating you." She walked inside and began untying the nearest man, a man in his 30s with a broken face and dried blood on his lip. Carla followed her and began freeing the others. "Can you walk?" Samantha asked. The man nodded and pulled the gag out of his mouth. "Yes, we didn't expect. Thank you. You can thank me later. Let's move, quickly." Stone's voice in the headphones. "Green, what's the status?" 5 are free. We're leaving through the back entrance. 2 minutes. Excellent. We're on our way out. Meet us at the extraction point. Samantha helped the last hostage, a young woman who was barely able to stand, to her feet. Carla supported her from the other side. "Let's go," Samantha commanded. They began to climb the stairs, moving slowly. The hostages were exhausted and moving with difficulty. Samantha led the way, covering the group, her rifle pointed upward. They had almost reached the top of the stairs when Samantha heard a sound that made her heart skip a beat. Voices. Many voices. Outside the building, someone raised the alarm. "Stone," she said quickly into the microphone. "We have a problem. Security is outside. We need a distraction." "Chen, blow it up," Stone ordered immediately. A second later, the earth shook. A powerful explosion from the east side of the village lit the night with an orange glow. Screams, panic, the sounds of running feet. "Let's go now," Samantha shouted. They ran out of the building. The village erupted in chaos. Militants ran toward the explosion. Civilians ran out of their homes. Children cried. In the smoke and darkness, Samantha and her group were almost invisible. Almost. One of the militants turned and saw them. His eyes widened, and he began raising his machine gun. Samantha fired first, a short burst to the chest. The gunman fell, but his cry attracted the attention of the others. "Run!" Samantha shouted to the hostages. "Carla, cover!" They ran down a narrow street to the edge of the village. Shots rang out behind them. Bullets whistled past, sparks flying from the stone walls. Brown's voice in the headphones. "I see you! I've got your back!" 3 shots from behind. 3 militants who were pursuing them fell. Samantha ran out of the village, the group following behind. Ahead, 3 kilometers away, they could see the plateau where the helicopter was waiting. 3 kilometers. Over rough terrain. With 5 exhausted men. She ran, feeling her lungs burning, her muscles protesting. Behind her, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. The militants had organized themselves and begun pursuing. "Stone, where are you?" Samantha breathed into the microphone. 200 meters to your left. We see you. Coming over. Figures emerged from the darkness, Stone and the rest of the team. They formed a protective circle around the group. "Move!" Stone shouted. "Brown, hold them off!" Sniper rifle shots rang out methodically, each one finding its target. The pursuit slowed, and the militants took cover behind the rocks. The group reached the helicopter 8 minutes later. The pilot was already starting the engines, and the blades were beginning to spin. "Get in!" Samantha shouted, helping the hostages get inside. Carla was the last to jump into the helicopter. Her face was covered in sweat and dust, but her eyes were shining with triumph. The helicopter lifted off just as the first militants reached the plateau. Bullets struck the aircraft's skin, but harmlessly. A second later, they were out of range, gaining altitude. Samantha leaned back in her seat, closed her eyes, and let the adrenaline slowly drain from her blood. They did it. Everyone's alive. Mission accomplished. Beside her, Carla was breathing heavily, holding onto the seatbelts. She began. "It was work," Samantha finished. "Now you know what it looks like in reality." Carla looked at her. "And you did this for years?" "Yes. How do you live with this?" Samantha opened her eyes and looked at the 5 rescued hostages sitting at the far end of the helicopter. Some crying, some just silent, shocked. "You live with this because you know that if you don't, no one will save them," she said quietly. "And it's the only excuse you have to look in the mirror in the morning." Carla nodded slowly, digesting what was said. The rest of the flight passed in silence.